The sun cast a golden hue over Lafayette Park, a beloved community space nestled in the heart of Savannah, Georgia. The air was rich with spring warmth, the kind that made everything feel softer, slower, and somehow suspended in a moment of peace. Families laid out blankets on the grass, children shrieked with laughter as they chased bubbles, and couples strolled lazily under the canopy of blooming dogwood trees. It was the kind of day that made people believe in the goodness of the world. And then it happened. Among the scattered joy was Amani Carter, a 9-year-old girl with bright brown eyes and a gap-toothed smile that lit up her entire face. She wore a pastel yellow sundress, her curly hair tied back in two bouncing puffs, and her pink bike, adorned with glitter streamers, was her pride and joy. Her mother, Danielle, watched from a picnic blanket, her book resting on her lap, eyes following her daughter with the kind of care only a mother knows. Imani wasn't doing anything extraordinary. She wasn't causing a scene. She was simply riding her bike slowly along the paved path that curved past the park benches. She had just helped a toddler pick up a fallen sippy cup, earning a shy thank you from the child's mother, and was heading toward a shady corner of the park where an old man played soft jazz on a saxophone. But joy, especially black joy, has a way of drawing out the worst in those who live bitter lives. Seated rigidly on a bench nearby was Walter Briggs, a retired security officer with a scowl seemingly carved into his face. His collared shirt was pressed, his loafers polished, and his expression, one of thinly veiled contempt, never changed. He had long believed this park was his territory, a place he felt was slipping away from him, one smile, one color, one laugh at a time. He watched Amani with narrowed eyes, arms crossed tightly over his chest. The sound of her giggling grated at his nerves like nails on a chalkboard. As Amani's front wheel swerved slightly to avoid a crack in the path, her pedal brushed gently against the toe of Walter's shoe. Barely a graze, the kind of contact most would ignore with a simple smile or a wave. But not Walter. He exploded. "Hey!" he shouted, leaping from the bench with such speed that nearby birds took flight. "Watch where you're going, kid." Imani immediately stopped, startled, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly, her voice trembling. "It was an accident." But he wasn't listening. "Kids like you think the world belongs to you," he barked, pointing a shaking finger at her face. "Disrespectful. Reckless. Who let you in here anyway? This isn't a place for people like you." People began to notice. Conversations paused. The jogger slowed his pace. A couple holding hands looked back, startled. Danielle stood up, alarm bells going off in her mind as she started toward her daughter. Imani clutched her handlebars, frozen. Her apology hung in the air like a fading echo, completely ignored. And then, without warning, Walter Briggs slapped her. Hard. Gasps erupted across the park like a thunderclap. The sound of the strike echoed against the silence that followed. Imani's small body crumpled to the ground, her cheek red, her eyes flooded with tears. She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She just sat there, stunned, trying to understand how a bike ride turned into a nightmare. Danielle screamed. Mothers rushed to shield their children. Phones flew into hands. The sound of recording apps launching buzzed like a swarm of bees. The jogger, who had stopped now, sprinted toward the scene, followed by a man who had been playing chess with his grandson under a tree. Walter stood over the little girl, breathing heavily, unapologetic. Maybe next time you'll watch where you're going, he muttered. But there wouldn't be a next time. Not for him. Because what Walter Briggs didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined in his ugliest assumptions, was that Imani Carter wasn't just any little girl. She was the daughter of Savannah's chief of police. And at that exact moment, Danielle Carter, her voice shaking but her hands steady, texted one word to her husband. Now. No one in the park could have predicted how fast everything would change. Not even Walter. Especially not him. The sound of the slap seemed to linger in the air longer than it should have, echoing past the trees, over the benches, and into the hearts of every witness. It wasn't just a sound. It was a wound, an audible crack that broke the illusion of peace, shattering the innocence of a perfect day. Imani sat motionless on the concrete path, her knees scraped, her cheek flushed a painful red. Tears streamed down her face, not from the physical pain, but from the shock, the humiliation, and the weight of a world that had just shown her how cruel it could be, without warning. Danielle reached her daughter in seconds, her heart pounding so loudly it nearly drowned out the gasps and murmurs from the growing crowd. She dropped to her knees and pulled Imani into her arms, whispering reassurances with a trembling voice. "You're okay, baby. You're safe. I'm here." Walter Briggs took a step back, his face reddening, not with shame, but indignation. "She came at me with that damn bike," he growled to no one in particular. "That's the problem with these kids. No respect, no discipline." His words didn't quiet the crowd. They ignited it. A man in a sweat-soaked tank top, Marcus, the jogger who had paused earlier, stepped forward, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Are you serious right now? You hit a child, a little girl." "She ran into me," Walter barked. "Scraped my shoe. I reacted." Another voice joined the fray. An older woman with a sun hat and gardening gloves in her lap. "I saw the whole thing," she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "That girl barely touched him. He just snapped." Phones were raised now, dozens of them. Some people filmed quietly. Others narrated in whispers of outrage. The shock was rapidly transforming into something else, something collective, something powerful. Among the bystanders was Jordan Vega, a high school teacher who had brought his niece to the park that morning. He stood by the fountain, watching, disbelief written across his face. He didn't know the girl's name, didn't know her mother, but he knew exactly what had just happened. He had seen it too many times. The justification, the projection, the arrogance of someone so used to getting away with it, they didn't bother hiding it anymore. Walter still stood his ground, chin up, eyes defiant. "You're all making this into something it's not," he snapped. "This is the problem with this country. People overreact to everything." Marcus stepped in closer, fists clenched but controlled. "You're right about one thing. People are tired. Tired of watching guys like you harm kids and expect to walk away without consequence." Danielle rose slowly to her feet, still cradling Imani in one arm as she turned to face Walter directly. Her face was composed, but her eyes burned. "You don't know who you just hit," she said softly. "But you will." Walter scoffed. "Oh, let me guess. You're going to cry victim now and drag me through the mud because I defended myself?" "No," she replied. "I'm not going to drag you anywhere. The truth will." Just then, the crowd parted slightly as a young man in a uniform jogged into the scene. He was off duty, but had received the message Danielle had sent just minutes ago. Danielle, he said, breathless, eyes scanning the crowd. The chief's on his way. He's close. Walter's posture shifted. The chief? You'll meet him soon enough, Danielle said, her voice low and clear. He's her father. The temperature in the air changed. People exchanged glances. There was something about knowing that accountability was imminent, palpable justice, that made the onlookers stand a little taller, speak a little louder. Nearby, a boy from the basketball court approached, clutching his ball against his chest. I bumped into that guy earlier today, he said to a woman recording the scene. He didn't say a word to me, but the second she got near him, he exploded. It wasn't just the slap anymore. It was the pattern, the contrast, the clear, painful truth. Walter hadn't reacted because of a scraped shoe. He had reacted to a child's skin color, to her joy, to the audacity of her existence near his space. More voices followed. I've seen him yell at black kids here before, a father in a Braves cap muttered. But I always thought it wasn't my business. Well, now it's all our business, someone replied. Even the birds seemed quieter, the wind still. All eyes were on Walter, but he didn't shrink. Not yet. Arrogance, after all, is stubborn, especially when it's fed by years of getting away with the same behavior in silence. Walter pointed to the crowd. You're all being ridiculous. This is a setup. You're ganging up on me for defending myself. No, Danielle said, steady as stone. This isn't a gang. This is a community. And for once, you're being seen for who you really are. Somewhere in the distance, a siren blipped briefly. Not loud, not frantic. Just enough to signal something was coming. Something that had already been set in motion. The saxophone player, still seated in the grass, had stopped playing. He set his instrument down slowly, almost ceremoniously, and watched with quiet reverence. The world's changing, he muttered to the child beside him. One moment at a time. Danielle looked down at her. Imani nodded weakly. From the edge of the park, the gleam of a black SUV pulled into view. Doors opened with crisp precision. The man who stepped. The energy in the park shifted again. Breath caught in lungs. Phones steadied in hands. Whispers turned because the chief of police had arrived. And his name was Caleb Carter. Chief Caleb Carter didn't rush as he stepped onto the path that cut through Atlanta's Grant Park. His strides were measured, unshaken, as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The sun glinted off the polished badge clipped to his chest, but it wasn't the insignia that silenced the crowd. It was his presence, calm, contained, and undeniable. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his otherwise black hair. His uniform was pressed, his boots gleaming, but none of that mattered as much as the look in his eyes. A quiet fury shimmered beneath his otherwise controlled expression, one reserved for a man who had built a career out of serving a community that too often bore the scars of injustice. He walked straight to his wife and daughter without acknowledging the murmurs or phones aimed his way. Danielle rose to meet him, a flicker of relief crossing her face, though her jaw remained tense. Caleb crouched to Imani's level, gently brushing a hand over her cheek, careful not to touch the reddened skin where Walter's hand had landed. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Sweetheart," he said, "look at me." Imani raised her eyes slowly, the hurt still clinging to her like morning fog. "You're safe now," he said. "No one touches you again. Ever." She nodded. He kissed the crown of her head, then stood. The warmth in his face vanished. He turned to the two patrol officers standing awkwardly near Walter, who still hadn't fully grasped that the ground beneath him was no longer solid. Caleb's voice rang out, not loud, but with the unshakable weight of authority. Officers. Who responded to this call? Both men straightened instinctively. Officer Jenkins, the older of the two, cleared his throat. That would be us, sir. I need a full account. Now. Jenkins faltered. We arrived about 10 minutes ago. There was a lot of commotion. Witnesses claimed the girl had been struck by this man, but he insisted it was self-defense. Caleb's eyes narrowed. And your conclusion? We were attempting to de-escalate the situation. It looked like a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Caleb repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. My 9-year-old daughter was punched in the face. Did either of you interview the child? No, sir, not yet. Did you take statements from multiple witnesses? Not formally, no, but You didn't, Caleb cut in. You took the word of the adult white male and dismissed the accounts of an entire crowd, including the victim. Do I have that correct? The second officer, Simmons, shifted uncomfortably. We were still assessing. You assessed enough to let the assailant prepare to walk away, Caleb said coldly. You made a call without facts, without compassion, and without accountability. Take your radios and report to Internal Affairs. Effective immediately, both of you are relieved from field duty. The crowd murmured again, louder now, supportive, emboldened. Walter, who had grown increasingly pale during the exchange, finally found his voice. I didn't know she was your daughter, he said, as if that fact might absolve him. Caleb turned to him, his expression hardening. That's your defense? Walter stammered. If I'd known, You never what? Caleb's voice sharpened. Never would have hit her? Never would have yelled? You think her dignity depends on who she's related to? The silence that followed was heavy. It shouldn't matter who she is, Caleb said, voice steady again. No child deserves that. No person. You looked at her and decided she wasn't worth your patience. Then you looked at the people who tried to stop you and treated them like noise. Walter opened his mouth, but Caleb raised a hand, not in threat, but in warning. Don't speak unless it's an apology. And even that, at this point, might not be worth hearing. From behind the line of trees came the sound of more engines. A police vehicle marked with Internal Affairs arrived, flanked by 2 unmarked cruisers. Caleb hadn't come alone. Justice wasn't coming as an idea. It was showing up in flesh and blood. Caleb turned to the crowd. If you witnessed the incident, please stay and provide statements to our investigative team. We will collect every account. No one's voice will be ignored. He didn't have to say more. The people, those who had been filming, speaking, stepping in when it counted, began lining up in silence. Mothers with strollers, joggers with towels around their necks, teenagers gripping basketballs. Every color, every age, all with one shared truth. They had seen something ugly, and they had chosen not to look away. Walter was no longer defiant. He looked down at his shoes, now scuffed with the faint mark of Imani's pedal. His breath came faster. His bravado had bled out. In its place was something else. Fear, yes, but also exposure. The kind that comes not from being caught, but from being truly seen. One of the investigators approached Caleb and whispered something. Caleb nodded and stepped back to Danielle and Imani. He crouched again, lifting Imani into his arms, careful of her bruised cheek. Danielle reached out to touch his shoulder. You did what needed to be done. Caleb didn't respond right away. He looked out across the park, once a place of rest, now a scene of reckoning, and sighed. She'll remember this day for the rest of her life. I just hope she remembers the part where the people stood up for her more than the part where she was hurt. He looked down at Imani. Her head rested against his chest, her eyes closed, but her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. Then he whispered, just for her, you're not invisible, baby. Not today. Not ever again. And with that, the tide of the day began to turn. The park didn't return to normal that afternoon. It couldn't. Grant Park, usually humming with laughter, footsteps, and music, now held an unspoken weight. A tension that lingered even after the squad cars pulled away and Chief Caleb Carter had carried his daughter home. But something else lingered too. Something more powerful than silence. The videos taken during the altercation spread like wildfire across social media. What began as a local incident quickly turned into national outrage. Millions watched the clip of a little black girl being struck by an older white man. They saw her pain. They heard her mother's voice, unwavering yet seething with restraint. And most importantly, they saw her father, a police chief, a black man, a symbol of accountability, hold not only the man who assaulted his daughter responsible, but also the very officers who had failed to act. By nightfall, hashtags like #Justice for Imani and #Protect Black Children were trending across platforms. Celebrities, activists, parents, educators, people from all walks of life shared their anger, their heartbreak, and their calls for change. The clip wasn't just a story about one family. It had become a mirror, reflecting a truth many had tried to ignore. But beyond the screens and hashtags, real-world ripples began to take shape. The following morning, the mayor of Atlanta held a press conference flanked by Chief Carter and the city's director of community engagement. Her tone was solemn but resolved. What happened at Grant Park is a tragedy not only because a child was hurt, but because she was failed by a system that should have protected her. We are reviewing every policy that allowed this to happen, and we are listening. For Chief Carter, the day was long. After making sure Imani was resting, comforted by her favorite stuffed lion, and a promise that she wouldn't have to return to that park unless she wanted to, he spent the rest of the day fielding calls. Civil rights leaders, school officials, neighboring police departments, all wanting to meet, to talk, to figure out how to turn this moment into momentum. But the most surprising ripple didn't come from above. It came from the people. That afternoon, a small group of parents returned to Grant Park, not to protest, but to transform. They brought flowers and chalk, water bottles and blankets, and they brought their children. Right near the basketball court, where everything had unraveled, they laid out a banner. We stand with Imani. Kids crouched on the pavement and wrote messages in chalk. You are brave. You are loved. We believe you. Their parents handed out juice boxes, kept an eye on each other's little ones, and watched as strangers became something more. Witnesses turning into allies. Danielle stood at the edge of the scene, not ready to join just yet, but not ready to turn away either. One of the mothers approached her and offered a timid smile. She doesn't have to come today, but if she ever wants to see what happened after, we'll still be here. Danielle nodded, emotion tightening her throat. For so long, she had taught Imani to be strong, to smile when it hurt, to say, "Excuse me," even when she wasn't in the wrong. But now, she realized maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe it wasn't about asking children to be strong. It was about building a world where they didn't have to be. News stations soon arrived, covering not just the assault, but the aftermath. They highlighted the community coming together, the accountability being demanded, and the love being poured back into a space that had been stained by hate. Interviews with witnesses revealed new layers of humanity. People who admitted they had once hesitated to speak up in similar situations, but now felt forever changed. One of those voices was Hector, the guitarist who had played just before the incident. "I've seen men like that before," he told a local reporter, "but I've never seen a father walk in with that kind of grace and power. We all needed to see it. I needed to see it." Imani's story began appearing in op-eds and think pieces. Educators used the footage in workshops on racial bias. Churches brought it into sermons. A high school debate team in nearby Decatur centered their upcoming competition around the theme, "When Silence is Violence." Even the Atlanta Police Department began to feel the tremors. Officers started requesting racial sensitivity training not as a punishment, but as a step forward. Chief Carter, though wary of hollow promises, met with young recruits, telling them, "You don't have to look like me to protect someone like my daughter, but you do have to respect her humanity. If you can't do that, you don't belong here." And yet, for all the waves this moment had created, the most tender ones happened quietly. Late one evening, Caleb found Imani awake in bed, the room lit only by the soft blue glow of her nightlight. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice small. "Anything," he replied, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Why did he hit me?" Caleb exhaled, the weight of the question heavier than his badge. "Because he was scared of what he didn't understand. And when people are scared like that, they can be cruel. But I didn't do anything." "I know, baby," he said. "And you didn't deserve it. But you weren't alone. You spoke the truth. And people heard it. That's how change begins." She nodded slowly, then said, "I want to go back." "To the park?" "Yes. Not today. But soon. I want to ride my bike again. And I want to be happy there." Caleb felt his throat tighten, but he smiled. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." And just like that, another ripple began. Not loud, not viral, but no less powerful. It was a little girl choosing not to let fear take what joy still belonged to her. It was the beginning of healing. Weeks had passed since the day Grant Park was shattered by violence and rebuilt through resolve. Though the trees still rustled with the same soft wind and children's laughter once again echoed between the swings and slides, something had changed. Not just in the landscape, but in the way people walked through it. Eyes were softer, greetings warmer, silences shorter. The park now bore a new sign at its entrance, etched in bronze and rooted in stone. Imani's Garden, a space for every child. It stood not as a reminder of pain, but of perseverance. The garden was planted by community members, with flowers chosen by local children. Bright daisies, gentle lavender, strong marigolds, all bursting in color and symbolizing joy, reclaimed. Chief Caleb Carter had insisted that the garden not be placed near the court where his daughter was struck. "That space will always be what it was," he had said, "but this will show what we became." Imani returned to the park for the first time since the incident on a warm Saturday morning. Her hair was braided neatly, a white ribbon tied at the end. She wore her favorite denim jacket, the one with the sewn-on heart patches her mom had stitched after every fall off her bike. She wasn't the same little girl who had once trembled beneath an angry man's shadow. She was taller now, not in inches, but in courage. Beside her walked Danielle and Caleb, each holding one of her hands. They passed the place where it had all happened without slowing. And when they reached the garden, Imani's eyes lit up. Children were already gathered there, chalking peace signs on the sidewalk and giggling as they chased butterflies. Some recognized her and waved. One boy stepped forward and offered her a flower. "You're the girl who stood up," he said simply. Imani took the flower and smiled, the kind of smile that grows only from having endured and overcome. Nearby, a group of officers stood, not in uniform, but as members of the community. One of them, a young Latina recruit, knelt to help a child fix a helmet strap. Another was speaking to a group of parents about a new initiative focused on anti-bias education in schools. Caleb watched them, feeling hope root itself in his chest, like one of the saplings they'd planted. The media had long since left, and the viral fame had faded. But in its place bloomed something quieter and far more lasting: trust. Not blind, not naive, but earned through truth and effort. The city had introduced a new program to ensure community complaints were reviewed by a civilian board. Officer training now included simulations led by social workers and educators. And Danielle had joined a city council working group focused on equity in public spaces. But beyond policy and process, it was the human moments that carried the most weight. Alicia, the jogger who had first stepped forward to defend Imani, now volunteered weekly at a local mentoring program. Hector, the guitarist, played weekend concerts in the park, with a sign next to his case that read, "Music for Maya, for Imani, for all." Even the teenager from the basketball court had spoken at a youth summit about allyship and standing up when it counts. Imani, with her quiet strength, had sparked a shift. And that shift had become a legacy. As the sun began to set that evening, casting long golden streaks over the grass, Caleb lifted Imani onto his shoulders, just like he used to when she was younger. She pointed toward the horizon and said, "I want to help other kids feel safe too." "You already are," Caleb replied. She didn't know it yet, but she had changed her city. Not because she had spoken the loudest, but because she had been heard when it mattered most. And in the heart of Atlanta, a new legacy had begun, not written in fear, but in courage. Not built on silence, but on the voices of those who refused to be ignored. It belonged to Imani, and to every child like her who just wanted a safe place to laugh, to ride, to be. In a single afternoon at Grant Park, the ordinary collided with the unimaginable, and what began as a peaceful day for a young black girl named Imani turned into a turning point for an entire community. Her smile, once the brightest thing beneath the canopy of trees, was almost silenced by hatred. A grown man, driven by prejudice and entitlement, struck her not just with his hand, but with the weight of generations of injustice. What he didn't expect, however, was the power standing just beyond the trees. Her mother, Danielle, fierce and unflinching, and her father, Chief Caleb Carter, whose badge carried not only authority, but a relentless resolve for justice. The man, once confident in the silence that usually followed his kind of hate, was left speechless when confronted not only by Caleb, but by a rising tide of voices. Parkgoers, bystanders, strangers who had nothing in common except their shared outrage. And most importantly, cameras caught everything: the slap, the tears, the truth, the justice. But what truly turned this moment into a movement wasn't the viral video. It was the collective decision by everyday people to do more than react. They chose to respond with action, with reform, with healing. What unfolded afterward wasn't about punishment. It was about purpose. The city of Atlanta didn't just witness a reckoning. They built something better from it. Imani's story became the spark for a citywide examination of prejudice in public spaces. Training programs were rewritten. Officers were retrained. A little girl, bruised but unbroken, became a symbol, not of victimhood, but of victory. Her father, a leader within the system, turned his heartbreak into a blueprint for lasting change. And her mother turned pain into purpose by helping craft new policies that demanded safety and dignity for every child. Across the park, across the city, and eventually across the internet, people saw something that struck a chord deeper than headlines ever could. The sight of a child who should have been riding her bike without fear, and a father who reminded the world what true power looks like when it's guided by love and justice. What happened to Imani was unjust, but it was not rare. That's what makes this story so necessary to remember. Because this wasn't just a story about a single act of hate. It was about the ripple effects of courage. How one mother refused to let injustice pass. How one father turned a badge into a shield for his daughter. And how an entire park chose not to look away. There's a lesson here for all of us. It teaches us that silence protects the aggressor, not the innocent. That change begins not when injustice is exposed, but when enough of us refuse to accept it anymore. That standing up doesn't require a badge or a podium. Sometimes it starts with a single person saying, "That's not right." Sometimes it begins with a child who keeps riding after she's been knocked down. Imani didn't set out to be the voice of a movement, but because she was seen, because she was protected, and because she was believed, her story now inspires hundreds, maybe thousands, to pay attention, to speak up, and to act. And so the next time you're faced with that moment, that choice between comfort and courage, between staying silent or standing up, remember Imani. Remember the crowd that formed around her. Remember her father's steady voice, her mother's unwavering stare, the community's outrage, and the blooming garden that now bears her name. Because every voice matters, yours included. And if her story moved you, challenged you, or reminded you of the power each of us carries to shape a better world, don't let it stop here. Let's keep this conversation alive. If you believe in standing up for what's right, if you believe in protecting the innocence of childhood, if you believe that every act of courage creates a legacy worth remembering, then support stories like this. Subscribe to our channel. Share this video and be a part of the reason we can keep telling stories that matter. Stories that don't just reflect the world we live in, but help shape the one we want to create. Your voice is powerful. Use it, and we'll be here telling the truth, one story at a time.